just hit that. So Frank has been to Penn State quite a few times to talk to the Justice Association, to my classes. He's a dynamic speaker. We'll probably wish that we had more than an hour with him tonight to really get the full effect of his background, his knowledge, his expertise. But let me just give you a very quick introduction for Frank, because I don't want to cut into his time. Frank has had a rich and diverse career. He, if we go back to kind of the beginnings, he was an intelligence officer with the Marine Corps, and was part of, you were in Somalia, and well, you can give the description. I don't want to misstate anything and say that you were in some operations when you weren't. You were in the Gulf Wars as well? Okay. So around that time period, then went to the DEA and then the National Drug Intelligence Center, which no longer exists, but that's when I met Frank. It was the intelligence center for papers on anything dealing with drugs, with drug trafficking, things like that. Top secret reports, other kinds of reports for government, law enforcement, for Congress, whoever might request something. Unfortunately, it doesn't exist anymore. That's kind of a political battle. If you're interested in politics of Washington, we could talk about why it doesn't exist. From there, Frank, well, since 2012, Frank has been an instructor at the FBI Academy. He's an expert in communications analysis. He's a consultant to police departments, government, private companies, and he's taught such classes. He's taught countless, it seems like countless classes, but he's specialized in classes such as critical thinking, psychology of evil, psychology of violence and deception. He's an expert on, as I said, communication analysis, including detecting deception and analyzing both written communication, oral communication, body language. So I could go on and on and on with this introduction, but you don't want to hear me talk. You want to hear Frank talk. So it's all yours, Frank. Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Howard. All right, I want to start out by saying that I gave a lot of thought about what you might be interested in hearing. And I thought about my time back at Penn State University back in the 1980s, and this new thing called terrorism was coming out. And in fact, it was my unit that had been sent to Beirut that got blown up in the Marine barracks. Many of the Marines I served with were killed in that bombing that really pushed me towards wanting to understand intelligence and terrorism and crime and evil. But I was wondering what you might be interested in. So I'm going to try and talk in a way that might address some of the things that you're interested in and the unorthodox way that got me to where I am now. So please, at any time, if you have a question, type in the question and I will try and address it. And if I don't, then Howard, please get with me and alert me that there is a question that needs to be addressed. But I'm going to share some things with you that I think I would have been interested in had I been sitting at Penn State today and talking to someone who's got my background. So here goes. This may seem a little unconventional, but at the age of 17, I joined the United States Marine Corps because I didn't think I had the smarts to make it through college. And so I got accepted to the Marines and I went to Paris Island, which we often call the land that God forgot. And as a Marine, I had a girlfriend going to Penn State and I decided to try and apply, but I knew that my grades weren't good enough. I knew that my SATs weren't good enough, but I decided to apply anyway. And I went up when I was on leave to Penn State and I asked to see the administration officer. And I said, I know my grades stink. I know my test scores are horrible, but what can I do to get myself in a position that you might accept me? And the administration officer said, well, ask me some questions as to what I was interested in. And then after we were talking for a few minutes, the administration officer suddenly picked up her phone and said, bring me the Frank Marsh folder, which wasn't very thick at that point. And we talked a little bit longer. And I found out that her son had just left for Army boot camp. And so we shared a few things and I left. Well, next thing I know, stationed at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, I find out that I've been accepted to Penn State main campus. And I'm like, how the heck did that happen? Well, apparently in my communication with the head administration officer for Penn State had bonded with her enough that she had lost her son going to Army boot camp and I had basically come out of boot camp, was enough of a connection, and she saw my drive that she approved my application. So now I'm up at Penn State. I have no idea what you're supposed to take. So I copied my roommate's schedule. And my roommate was a senior in political science. So I copied his schedule. So there I am as a freshman sitting in 400 level courses of political science. And that's all I took pretty much for 4 years at Penn State. I never took the 100 or 200 levels, but I suddenly found that I had this interest in political science. And I went back into the Marine Corps as an officer this time. And I became an intelligence officer after completely bombing out as a pilot, because apparently to be a pilot, you need to be a quick thinker. And I am not a quick thinker. I'm a very slow, acquisitive thinker. So after bombing out of flight school, they gave me my choice, and I chose intelligence, which I found ironic. And I found in the world of intelligence, I suddenly started exceeding because it was slow, acquisitive thought. It was thinking something over and over and tearing things apart, decompositioning and questioning everything, which was my forte. So I started doing quite well when all of a sudden this thing called Desert Storm and Desert Shield broke out. And as we were going through the Suez Canal, I created the first international incident of the Gulf War, because it was my job to brief everyone on my aircraft carrier on Arab cultures and customs. And so I briefed everyone on what we need to know about Arab cultures and customs. Well, as we were going through the Suez Canal, we take on Egyptian boat captains and his crew who helped guide our ship through the Suez Canal. And they wanted to impress the Egyptian boat captain and his crew, so they took him to the first class mess, where they fed him extra, and his crew, extra helpings of bacon and ham and sausage. Whereupon I suddenly hear over the ship's loudspeaker, the XO to the first class mess, XO to the first class mess. A few minutes later, I hear captain to the first class mess, captain to the first class mess. About 20 minutes later, I hear Lieutenant Marsh to the captain's cabin. So I go running to the captain's cabin, and the captain asks me, Lieutenant Marsh, were you in charge of briefing the entire ship on Arab cultures and customs? I said, yes, sir. I briefed everyone. I briefed the ground crew. I briefed the infantry. I briefed the air crew. I briefed the pilots. I briefed the ship's company. I briefed the mechanics. I briefed everyone. He says, and I quote, did you brief the cooks? No. I don't know if you know this, but cooks keep ungodly hours. They get up at midnight to start making everyone breakfast. And I did not get a chance to brief the ship's cooks. Our captain had to send a flash message, which means a message that the president must read within 20 minutes, because it had created such a fiasco from the Egyptian boat captain and his crew when they found out what they were eating. So from that glorious start of my intelligence career to going into Mogadishu when our embassy was being overrun, and I was in charge of the intelligence effort for the 4th Marine Expeditionary Brigade, and had what could have been the second fiasco of my career was, as helicopters are turning, as we're getting ready to launch helicopters into the heart of the fighting to go rescue our embassy, which was about to be overrun by Somali insurgents, a warrant officer walks by and looks at my map and says, you do know that they moved the embassy, don't you? Even though we had been in constant contact with our embassy and asking them, where do you want us to land? And they said, land in the field to the west of the embassy. And we looked on our maps for the field to the west of the embassy. The embassy was no longer there. And when this mission was handed to us, when we were given the warning order, we had called up our command ship and talked to our general and said, give us the latest maps on Mogadishu. And the order was negative. You've only been given the warning order. If you get the tasking order, we'll get the maps to you. Well, our ship had immediately turned south out of the Persian Gulf down to Mogadishu, Somalia. And by the time we got the tasking order, we were out of range and couldn't get the latest maps. So what I'm trying to share with you is that I've made a lot of mistakes in my career. And I'm hoping that in my 30 years of working investigations, working intelligence, that I've got a lot to share with you, because I believe in the one definition of the word wisdom. The Greek origin for the word wisdom actually means with pain, which means that in order to get wise, we must suffer. And I have suffered. I've made a lot of mistakes. And I'm hoping to share those mistakes with you and share some of the wisdom that I've learned along the way. So if you have any questions about my time in the Marine Corps, and after the Marine Corps, I went to the DEA, where I was at the El Paso Intelligence Center in El Paso, Texas. And from there, I went to the National Drug Intelligence Center, where I was in charge of the training unit. And from there, I went to the FBI, where I'm an instructor in the advanced unit. And before I became an instructor in advanced unit, I was an instructor in the basic analyst training unit, teaching new analysts and new agents that come into the FBI Academy. And then I was fortunate enough to be able to do a 3-year TDY with the behavioral science unit. And that was an amazing experience. And then from there, I moved to the advanced intelligence training unit, where I've been an instructor ever since, and where I instruct for the advanced analyst program, the intelligence community's advanced analyst program. For the National Academy, I teach law enforcement officers from around the world. I teach for the surveillance program, so for the agents and the surveillance specialists who conduct surveillance, I teach them. For the international program, I've taught for part of that program. And I've seen a lot of things that work, and I've seen a lot of things that don't work. And I'm going to share with you now, unless you have any questions to this point, as to some of the things that I see that I think you could benefit from. And I'm reading anonymous attendee. Is a law degree beneficial to working in intelligence or law enforcement? Absolutely. A law degree is incredibly beneficial, because I believe that understanding the law obviously is the foundation of much what we do, the laws, the statutes. But I also believe in law, do they not teach you the importance and the principles of effective argumentation in building your case and being able to attack another case? So I believe argument analysis and argument mapping are critical skills that whether you go into law or whether you go into intelligence, argument analysis and argument mapping are critical skills. Matter of fact, I highly recommend, if you would, a company that really was one of the leaders in argument mapping and argument analysis is called Think. They're out of Australia, and they have a tutorial that you can freely access that is an excellent example of how to begin to learn how to use argument mapping and argument analysis.
And I'll add, I just got an email to renew my membership in Think, and they actually have discounts for students. So if you go to Austhink, AUSTHINK, I don't know if that's org or com or what it is afterwards, but if you Google it, they'll show you how to map arguments and how to take more effective notes. So,
excellent, thank you. And please, Howard, jump in at any time to add or steer me in a different direction wherever I need to go. So I'm looking at a question right now. Do you mind giving an overview of how your FBI career has impacted your civilian life? I finished my active duty service this past August. I want to know what sort of differences and similarities they have. All right, I'm going to hopefully come back, answer this in a roundabout way, so bear with me. One of the first things I would share with you is be careful what you pray for, and be careful what goals you set. The reason I say is this. A buddy of mine tried to talk me into, a buddy of mine who I was in the Marine Corps with, tried to talk me into going into Secret Service with him. And at that point in my career, I was sick and tired of carrying guns and being worried about where my gun was at all times. So I turned him down. And I met him about 12 years later after he'd been in the Secret Service. And he said to me that he had peed, he had relieved himself in every hotel staircase around the country. And I said, why are you peeing in staircases in hotels around the country? And he says, because the Secret Service is so incredibly underfunded that they don't have enough agents to do everything that they need. And that when you're protecting the president or other dignitaries and you're put in a staircase and you stand there for 12 hours, you don't always have someone who can come relieve you of your position so that you can go relieve yourself. So many of the agents would actually carry bottles so that they could pee in the bottles if they had to. And I share that with you to let you know that there's a lot of things that we do in the intelligence community and in the law enforcement world that many of you don't know about. That is just super amazing and super sexy. And there's a lot of things that you got to scratch your head and go, how in the world do we ever catch any bad guys? So there are some good things and there's some bad things. So regardless of what you want to do, research the heck out of it, because it may not be all that you think it is. And coming back to that question, which apparently has disappeared, are those questions only up for a short period of time and then evaporate, Howard? Ah, there it is, it came back. So coming back to my career and how's it impacted my civilian life, I have pretty much not had a vacation since I was the age 17. I joined the Marine Corps at age 17, and from the Marine Corps I went right into the DEA, and from the DEA into the National Drug Intelligence Center, from the National Drug Intelligence Center into the FBI. And I have worked holidays, I have worked Christmases, I have traveled on anniversaries, birthdays. When you're working investigations and when you're instructing officers around the world, there's a lot to do and not always enough time to do it. I have made the choices that I've made, and I can honestly say I've never worked a day in my life because I absolutely love what I'm doing, but it's come at a cost. You cannot study the ways of criminals. You cannot look through some of these investigative case files and interview some of the bad guys that we do and not come away unchanged. So if you are not prepared to be able to talk to a pedophile and agree with a pedophile as to how many of these children are just asking to be attacked by the way that they dress and by their mannerism, how children are just growing up so fast. If you cannot agree with that pedophile without having this revulsion come over you and want to strangle this human being who just raped or abused this child, this may not be the field for you. Because as Freud said, you cannot walk into darkness without it touching you. You cannot walk into a puddle and expect that you're going to become clean. So I have worked some pretty horrific crimes. I have helped put away some pretty horrific people. And every day I try to find a way to put good things back into my brain. So one of the classes I teach is called SWAT, Success, Wellness, Attitude, Teamwork. And I created that class and I taught that class to help me deal with my own stress. So every day I am trying to find something positive to look at, to laugh at, to think about, because when you're working against terrorists, whether you're working against serial killers, whether you're working against money launderers, whether you're working against child abusers, you are going to see some darkness and experience some dark things, and it will impact you. So you have got to be resilient, and you've got to find a way to put on your emotional and mental armor first before you wade into the darkness. So it has impacted my life in many ways.
We have some more questions coming in, but maybe if you could just describe for a little bit, since you're an expert in communication analysis, what does that exactly mean?
Okay. And I'm glad you brought that up. Looking back on 30 years of working in investigations and intelligence and teaching all the different classes I do, I think communication analysis has been the most valuable investment of my life. And communication analysis has taught me how to analyze what you say, what you do, and what you write. And what it's taught me is that what you say tells me what you see. What you see tells me what you think. And what you think tells me who you are. How does it do this? Communication analysis is the process of listening and looking for what someone says as either sensitive, deceptive, or missing. And when you learn to listen with that much precision and with that much clarity, you can hear what is not said. I say again, when you learn to listen for what is sensitive, what is deceptive, and what is missing, you can actually hear and see what was not said. And the reason why this is so important is over 90 to 95% of murderers, rapists, arsonists, pedophiles do not lie to you. That is, they do not commit the act of lying. So if they are not lying by commission, then how are they lying? Well, they're lying by omission. Well, if they don't say the lie, how do you spot the lie that was not said? And you spot the lie that was not said by, and I love using this example. Have you ever seen a perfectly smooth lake? And then all of a sudden you see a ripple in the lake. And you wonder, what caused that ripple? Was it a fish? Was it a turtle? Was it a bird? Was it a gas bubble? Was it a stick? Was it a rock? What caused it? You don't know what caused that ripple. You just know that something disturbed the water. Well, communication analysis is a lot like that. That when you learn to start establishing baselines for what is normal behavior and what is abnormal behavior, then you're able to start identifying what is suspicious behavior. And you do this by asking questions. Give me an example. What is the purpose of calling 911? Purpose of 911 is to call for help. So what do we expect to hear when we hear a 911 call? We expect to hear help. There's a fire. Someone's been hurt. There's a lot of people who have been hurt. There's been a shooting. Get help to this address. So we expect to hear three things when someone calls 911. We expect to hear, I need help, where the help is needed, and who the help is needed for, or how many people, in order to get help. Because if I called 911 and I simply said help and hung up the phone, am I going to get the exact kind of help that I need? Probably not. Officers may respond even to a hung up 911 call, but you may not get, if it's a fire or someone that's needing an ambulance, you may not get the right help. So go with me on this one. Here's a 911 call. I had my husband go down and make me a sandwich. There's blood everywhere. I can't go down there. If I go down there, I'm going to seize. Is the purpose of calling 911 in order to tell them that you had your husband go downstairs and make you a sandwich? No. So we can already see that this call is outside the boundary of what we would call normal. And the same applies to whether you're looking at a ransom note. The same applies whether you're looking at a statement, whether you're interviewing or interrogating someone. You've got to ask simple questions as to what is expected and what is unexpected, what is normal and what is abnormal. And this applies to our words, this applies to our handwriting, and this applies to our body language. And when you understand the principles of communication analysis, you are inside someone's mind when they begin to speak. So I highly recommend that if you're interested in learning communication analysis, I would recommend a couple books. I would recommend that you get Identifying Lies in Disguise by Wendell Rudisell. I would also recommend that you get Investigative Discourse Analysis by Don Rabin. I would also recommend that you get The Gift of Fear by Gavin DeBecker. And the reason why I recommend that course, because when you start to understand the behavior of toxic individuals, whether they're psychopaths, whether they're narcissists, whether they're Machiavelli, you will begin to understand when they're being deceptive and when they're not. So those 3 books I would highly recommend if you're interested in communication analysis. So I'm going to try and read a few questions here. Hello, if one would like to apply to the FBI, do you know if they want to hire those that have either been to grad school and work in law enforcement police first before they apply to FBI? Yes, it depends on what you want to apply for. If you want to become an agent, and I believe you already had a talk from someone as to how to become an agent, did you not, Howard?
Yeah, he was last Thursday, Craig Donachie talked, but not everybody might have attended that talk.
Okay, well, they generally, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you heard from them, they generally look for people to have a little bit more life experience. So grad school would be a plus, previous law enforcement or military experience would be a plus if you want to become an agent. If you want to become an analyst, you don't have those restrictions, but I would recommend some things if you wanted to become an analyst. And there's other jobs in the FBI besides analysts and agents. We have what we call program analysts. We have surveillance people. We've got all kinds of tech people. If you know anything about cyber right now, they would scoop you up in a heartbeat. But right now, if you're interested in the FBI, is a definite time to apply, as from what I understand, that many of the classes have not been fully staffed, and that they've been having some trouble staffing some of the classes. So hopefully that answers that person's. Can you give insight into differences between being an agent in FBI and the CIA, please? Well, being an agent in the FBI, we are ruled by the laws, whereas the CIA, they break the laws. The CIA operating abroad is not held by many of the things that the FBI is. I'll give you an example. In the FBI, when we're working in investigations, everything that we do is discoverable. We've got to make sure that we know that almost everything that we do can be discovered in a court of law and has to be shared with the defense. However, in the CIA, when you're working primarily intelligence, you want nothing discoverable. So you don't have that challenge, if you will, constraining you. Let me read another question here. I'm interested to become a specialist in the FBI, and I'm going to bachelor's degree in criminology. It requires at least 2 years of professional work experience. Is there a specific federal agency you recommend to apply to gain experience? There's no specific agency I recommend, whether you're working with state and local law enforcement, whether you're working for a bank. And the reason why I say is this: almost any occupation, almost any agency can offer incredible value if you work it right. So I'll give you an example. A buddy of mine who came to the National Drug Intelligence Center was a banker before he started working at the National Drug Intelligence Center. And he became very disheartened, and he didn't think that working drugs was for him. And I had to remind him, what do drug traffickers do with all their millions of dollars? They launder it. Who better to try and teach agents and analysts how to understand how money moves than someone who's worked in the banking field? Give you another example. We had an analyst who spent 20 years working in the trucking industry. Who better to teach agents and analysts how things are shipped across the country, both legally and illegally, than someone who's had 20 years experience working in the trucking industry? Had another analyst who worked in real estate. Do you know that many drug traffickers, as well as terrorists, are using real estate to launder their money? So give me an example. Let's say I had a really tall apartment building in New York City. Oh, I don't want to put anyone's name out there. So let's say I named it after myself. I called it Marsh Towers. And let's say, 20 floors of those towers were bought and paid for by people who never occupied them. Now go with me on this one. Why would someone buy an apartment in an incredibly expensive apartment building and yet never move into it? And then sell it for a few years later for either a loss or a gain? It mattered not to them. Well, can you see why you can take almost any occupation or any field? Because crime is so broad and so deep, we need people with expertise in so many different fields. So whether it's forensics, whether it's computers, whether it's money, whether it's real estate, if you are interested, you could take whatever job, occupation, or even major. Give me an example, one of my favorites. We had an art major who became an analyst. Do you know the FBI has a unit that specializes on art fraud? Or another example, forestry. We had an analyst major in forestry. How could that help us? Do you know that when we've done manhunts, this analyst is the one who was able to help agents understand the type of forest that this person was moving through, the kind of vehicles that could go through this type of forest, and the kind of weight that this soil could sustain as far as some of our tracked vehicles or some vehicles were concerned. So hopefully I'm making my point to you that it doesn't matter the occupation, it doesn't matter the agency you go to, as long as you understand this. Do you know that if you study a topic for 20 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day, you study a single topic, at the end of a year, you will be a subject matter expert in that field. At the end of 3 years, you could become a national level expert, in 5 years, an international level expert in that topic. So whatever your field, whatever your interest, whatever your passion is, there's a connection to law enforcement and intelligence. So is there a certain criteria to meet to become an intelligence analyst? Don't do drugs, don't commit crimes. However, I will share this with you. The most amazing body language expert in the world that I've ever worked with grew up poor in Panama, and he had to steal for a living. This man was so brilliant at what he did. I'll show you how brilliant this man is. He would teach law enforcement officers how to tell when someone was lying just by the way they walked into a room. He would take 4 police officers out of the room, and he would give one of the officers a packet of sugar. And he would say, "This is cocaine. Now we're going to call each of you into the room one by one, and we're going, and students or the other officers are going to try and question you and figure out which one of you is carrying the packet of sugar/cocaine." He comes back into the classroom and he explains to the other officers, "This is what we're going to do. The other officers are going to walk into here one by one, and you're going to have to ask questions and figure out who's carrying the cocaine." So this instructor sits there, and the first student comes walking in, and all the other students start asking questions. The second student comes walking in, and just by the way he walked into the room, the instructor got up out of the room, walked to the other 2 students who were standing outside, and said to them, and I quote, "You son of a bitch, you switched the packet." What happened was the student who the instructor had given the packet of sugar to didn't want to do it and gave it to another officer. And just by the way that officer walked into the room carrying a packet of sugar, the instructor knew he now had the sugar/cocaine. So this is one of the downsides that I found, is that oftentimes we seek to find people who have a squeaky clean background, who can pass a polygraph, who can pass a background check, and yet they're not always the best to catch criminals. Why? Because sometimes you got to learn to think like a criminal in order to catch a criminal. And this is why in interviewing criminals, what you need to understand, that as you begin to think like a criminal, you are actually creating some of the same pathways in your brain that the criminals do in committing the crime. And this is why at the end of the day, each day, every officer, every agent, every analyst has got to take extra efforts to be in charge of the thoughts they think and put positive thoughts back in. So no, there is no certain criteria to meet other than passing that background check. There are certain fields. However, having a passion and developing some expertise in certain topics can definitely help you. Let me go to the next question. Did you work as an intelligence analyst or as an agent for the FBI? I work as an analyst for the FBI. Now, I've instructed agents, analysts, and officers from around the world. I think my last count, I was up to over 35,000 officers, agents, and analysts I've instructed around the world. And instructed them how to do some of the same tasks and some of the different tasks as well. So how do the duties of these roles differ? Agents are primarily in charge of, in the FBI, agents are primarily in charge of conducting the investigations. And the analysts are, along with others, are in charge of supporting the agents in their investigations. So we get a lot of the information that agents collect. We analyze that information, we evaluate it, we write the reports, or we support their investigations, and that will help move the investigation forward. So what information do you have about the Behavioral Analysis Unit? Behavioral Analysis Unit, you could Google a lot more than I could probably tell you. I was fortunate enough to work with the Behavioral Science Unit, which was responsible for instructing many of the courses dealing with behavioral science. I believe we're going to try and work on getting you a colleague of mine to come speak on behavioral science or behavioral analysis units who would give you a much better overview. But you could definitely find a much better overview as to the differences between the different behavioral analysis units. I believe there's 5 different units, all focusing in on different topics or threats around the country. And these behavioral science unit or behavioral analysis units are a part of what we call the Critical Incident Response Group. So anytime that there is a major event around the world, someone from the behavioral analysis units will respond. Matter of fact, I was thinking of applying for one of the analyst positions with the behavioral analysis unit, communication unit. And when I went and talked to the supervisor there, I said, tell me about this job. And they said, well, you're on the road about 48 weeks out of 52 weeks out of the year. I said, thank you very much. I was not about to come home and tell my family I would be gone for 48 out of 52 weeks out of the year. So what was your transition from Marine Corps to law enforcement like? And was that application process different for you compared to the civilian application process? Well, let me share this with you. While I was in the Marine Corps, I applied to go with join the DEA. It took me 3 years, not 3 years, it took me 3 times I applied to join the DEA. And the first time they lost my application, second time they sent it to the wrong office, and the third time I was in the middle of the Persian Gulf when they said that they would hire me. And obviously in the middle of a war, I couldn't leave to go join the DEA. As a senior level executive of the DEA once told me, he said, you know, we can arrest anybody. We just can't administer squat. I share that with you to understand that if you have a goal of joining law enforcement, and remember I told you, be careful what you wish for, but if it is your goal, please understand there are a lot of obstacles in joining, whether it's the FBI, DEA, or any organization. And one of them is the administrative challenges that we have. We don't always administer things as effectively or as efficiently as we do. So if you want this goal, please know that there will be obstacles in your way, but obstacles are what keep other people from achieving your goal. I'm amazed when I've seen people who, because they got turned down once, they say, that's it, I give up. You didn't give up the first time you crashed a bike, or the first time you tried to ride a skateboard, the first time you tried to walk. So why would you give up just because someone told you, no, you can't have this goal? So if you are interested in joining any of the organizations, research the crap out of them, look at what they want, and on the application process, I will share this with you. On the application process, whatever they ask for, use their words back at them. This is one of the principles of communication analysis, that people often look for and absorb their own words better than they do your words. Give you an example. If on the application process it says that you should have experience with money laundering, then tell me about how you have experience with money laundering. Do not tell me that you have extensive experience with net worth analysis, or that you've worked financial fraud or any of these other things. Reason being is The administrator who is reviewing all the applications is looking for the question and your answer. Question and answer. And even though you might have far more experience than the question is asking, if you do not reflect those words back at them, the administrator who's going through the application process doesn't understand the high levels of experience that you have and how you far exceed what they're asking for. They're just seeing that what you have on your answer doesn't match the question. So hopefully you'll find that extremely helpful. Only took me a few times to figure that out. What was your transformation? I was just wondering if you had any tips for the interview. Yes, practice the interview. If you're going to interview for a job with Dunkin' Donuts or with the Marine Corps or with the FBI, sit down and write down, if I was the employer, what kind of questions would I ask? And write out at least 50 questions that you would have. Then hand these questions to someone and say, will you interview me? And then practice answering those questions in the most positive way that you can. And go, if I was to answer this question this way, would I want to hire me? So give me an example. If one of the questions is, tell me about a difficult employee that you worked with and how you handled him, saying something like, well, I went over and threatened him, may not be your best answer. Or by saying, well, I just, told the boss about how that they were such a dirtbag. You may want to think of a more tactful way to show that you have some emotional intelligence in answering these questions. So hopefully that helps you. Next question. I'm at phase 3 of interview for my FBI intelligence analyst application. I was just wondering if you have any tips for the interview. Thank you. Again, same thing. Look at exactly what they're asking for. And one of the things that analysts are being asked to do is to brief, to write, and to be able to think. So what examples do you have that show that you can brief, you can write, and you can think in an effective, systematic way? So once again, tear apart the interview process. Chances are they ask the same questions over and over again. You can probably Google the crap out of it and say, okay, if I'm trying to hire for this, what are some questions I would be asking? There are some books out there with some basic interview and hiring questions you could probably look at. But the main 3 things that I'll add a fourth. The main 4 things that the FBI is looking for in their analysts. They're analysts who can think, who can brief, and who can write, but also have integrity and judgment. So give me some examples of your integrity and how you would handle difficult situations. All right. Do you think a federal public defender is effective greater or the same way by having to defend pedophiles, murderers, etc.? Let me understand your question. Do you think a federal public defender?
I think they're asking if an attorney is, when you said you were affected by interrogating pedophiles, murderers, there might be somebody who wants to be an attorney. Do you think they're affected the same way, attorneys?
Oh, absolutely. You cannot be exposed to some of these case files. Give me an example. I'm trying to self-censor as much as possible because I don't want to traumatize the audience. I had a case of a woman who, while on methamphetamine, gave her child a bath and badly scolded her child. Her child basically got 3rd-degree burns from the hot bath water. And to cover up the fact, the mother committed a even more horrendous crime. And I had to go through the statements. I had to go through the photos. I had to go through the doctor's autopsy report. It's been 25 years since I worked that case, and there's probably not a week that doesn't go by that case doesn't impact me in some way, shape, or form. So whether you're prosecuting, whether you are investigating, whether you are analyzing, it all impacts you, but you can be prepared for it if you understand how you need to be in charge of your thoughts. You need to be in charge of your emotions. And if you can't control your thoughts and your emotions, then this may not be the field for you. So I want to become a profiler of behavior.
Frank,
Yeah, go
just
ahead.
interject just for a second. Maybe you can just talk about when you're saying how you view the world. I know when you've come to my classes, you've talked about how psychopaths or sociopaths view the world. I mean, maybe you can just give a 2-minute
Absolutely.
explanation to talk about evil.
I love what Einstein was asked. and he basically said that there's only two ways to see the world. You either see the world as a beautiful, magical place filled with miracles or opportunity, or you see it as a dark, evil place where everyone is out to get you. And the question I have to ask you is this: how do you think psychopaths and serial killers and pedophiles view the world? Almost every single criminal I've ever interviewed, every single case that I've worked involving criminals, terrorists, psychopaths, serial killers, all viewed the world as a dark, evil place where everyone was out to get everyone else. Now, you may have been abused, you may have been hurt, you may have been disappointed, you may have some dark feelings of your own. But why this is so important is how you view the world influences how you view or how you perceive all the other evidence that comes at you. So give me an example. People who are mad, people who are sad, and people who are bad. So as I say, mad being angry or suffering from psychopathy, bad being career criminals, sad people suffering from depression, and the last category, but I didn't find a way to rhyme it, people under the influence of drugs or alcohol, will often view a neutral event through negative lenses. So Howard, I want you to go ahead and say good evening to me.
Good evening, Frank.
What do you mean by that, Howard? I don't care for your tone. All as Howard said to me was, good evening, Frank. But a person who is mad, sad, or bad, in other words, a person who has or is suffering from such negative, toxic thoughts, can perceive a neutral event in negative lenses. And this is why it's so important to understand that you're in charge of your thoughts, you're in charge of your feelings, you're in charge of everything, because people who have suffered loss, people who have been harmed, people who have been humiliated, people who have been abused, and who don't realize that they are responsible for their thoughts, then they allow the world and others to dictate how they see and think. And when you allow the world, especially this bipolar, toxic world that we're living in now, where everyone is evil, you know, you're either a neo-Nazi Republican or you're a lefto commie liberal, where we've labeled each other in such toxic terms. I need you to understand it's more important than ever that you be in charge of what you think and what you feel. So hopefully that addresses some of those concerns. So I want to become a profiler or behavioral analyst. I know this is extremely small unit FBI. Do you have any tips about the path to follow to potentially get in this specific area of profession? Absolutely. I like I equate it with this. Do you know professional football quarterbacks that are the number 2, so not the starting quarterback? Do you know they practice every single day? Every single day, they're standing on the sidelines and they're ready to go in. They're not waiting for the coach to say, hey, start getting ready. These guys are ready to go because they've been practicing, preparing for their whole life. So the way I equate that with the FBI profiling is, yes, it's a very small part of the FBI. But if you start studying now, you start preparing now, you start seeking out opportunities now. I think it was Louis Pasteur who said, chance favors the prepared mind. It is the same way with this. So I'll give you an example. No one told me to create a class on detecting deception. No one told me to create a class on violence. These were my ideas. And as I created these classes, suddenly all of a sudden people started asking me, hey, I understand you've been studying this. I understand that you've been writing about this. Would you come to my agency? Would you come to my unit and talk about it? So in other words, by pursuing what I was passionate about, I actually created the opportunities to go speak and go do the very thing that I wanted to do. And that's what I offer up to you. That if you want to become an analyst, you want to become an agent, start studying to become an agent and analyst, even if you're working for a company and you're not working for the agency or the bureau. Study, start going online and start researching topics that you're passionate about. And I'll give you an example why this is so important that you take charge of your career. in studying about interview and interrogation, I started looking up all the research on interview and interrogation. And after I researched it for about 6 months, I started being able to identify who were the main movers and shakers in the world of studying interview and interrogation. And so I would start emailing some of these people and said, hey, I read your book, I read your study on this, I had a few questions. And what I found about people who become international experts on these topics is that they love to talk about those topics. So at first I was a little intimidated about reaching out to these experts, but what I found after a few hours of being on the phone with them is I couldn't get these people off the phone because they love talking about that topic. And they started offering me, hey, I'm going to be in your city talking on this topic. Would you like to come and have a free seat in my class? Yes, I would love to. Hey, I'm going to be, and after I got to meet them, what was more amazing was as I shared my knowledge with this topic with them and they realized that I had done my homework, I'd done my research, they said, hey, I have to go talk in this city, but I can't do it. Do you want to take this speaking engagement for me? Why, yes, I would love to take it for you. So in other words, your passion should fuel your purpose, and that purpose then will open up doors for you. So don't wait to get the job or get the interview. Start doing the things that you want to do. So if you want to be a profiler, I'll share this with you. If you promise not to tell anyone. Promise? Okay, good. Do you know that the FBI has some challenges with how we do profiling? And the reason is this. The original people who did the study of profiling had too small a population. They only had, like, I believe, 36 serial killers that they studied in their group, and they were not systematic in how they asked the questions. So for those of you who are grounded in statistics far better than I, you know that interviewing 36 serial killers and not using a systematic method of inquiry is no foundation for building ground truth as to what principles or theories you can gain from that knowledge. But a gentleman by the name of, what the hell, I'm blanking on his name, out of London, England, who's created the field of what he calls investigative psychology. He found that if you increase the data size, you can draw some conclusions on being able to predict behavior from crime scenes. So I highly recommend that if you're interested in becoming a profiler in any way, shape, or form, Dr. Cantor, there it goes, now it comes to me. Dr. Cantor out of Great Britain, he's written several books on a topic that he calls investigative psychology. I highly recommend that you study his books and study his methods if you want to be taken as credible in the world of profiling. So what is the age requirement for the FBI? For agents or analysts, I believe it's higher for agents. For analysts, I believe it's 21. As soon as you come out of college, you could apply. What is the day-to-day work of an analyst like versus an agent? Analysts, unfortunately, can spend a lot of time reading reports, reading what we call raw intelligence reports, writing reports, and a lot along those lines. Agents can either spend a lot of time in the office or a lot of time out of the office, depending on their specialty and the type of cases that they're working. So is the academy paramilitary? No, the FBI Academy is not really paramilitary. The DEA Academy is a whole lot more paramilitary. Matter of fact, it's always amazing to see the difference between FBI agents at the Academy and DEA agents. FBI Academy is wearing kind of like polo shirts like I'm wearing here, and, you know, walking, sometimes running to class. The DEA agents are dressed all in black and running to every class. So a little bit of a difference there. So do you have information about the victim specialist job at the FBI? What would you recommend to someone looking into that job? No, I'm sorry, I don't have any information on that, but if Howard reminds me, I could find out and I could get back to him. So Howard, if you remind me, I will look into that and get that person an answer.
Will do.
Would you explain a little about Quantico and the training during the time there? I've been an instructor at the FBI Academy going on, what, 9 years now. And the thing that frustrates me is this. the FBI, when they hire lawyers, we don't send the lawyers back to law school to learn law. And it kind of frustrates me that we hire people who say many times that they know how to analyze information, and then we put them in an 11-week course trying to teach them how to analyze information. You're really not going to teach someone in 11 weeks how to do quantitative and qualitative analysis. This is what hopefully you're spending 4 years in college, or a couple of years in grad school doing. So I'm frustrated that we are attempting to teach in a matter of weeks what really should have taken years to learn. Now, we could spend some time showing how does the FBI do analysis once you've got those fundamental skills. But the FBI, over the few years that I've been there, has changed our program several times in an effort to try and fine-tune that by the time our analysts graduate and go to a field office, they're ready to do analysis, which I hesitate to state that they're fully ready to do if they weren't well grounded in the school of research methodologies and intelligence analysis or information technology. So what a part, can you back up a question? I wanted to answer one last part of that question. I can't remember what it was. Or is it evaporated? Oh, there, do you have any? No, victim social. Oh, and the training during the time there. So one of the things that they were doing with the training at the academy now is that they've tried blended learning, trying to get agents and analysts to train together. Obviously, the theory is those who train together play together. They're finding some challenges with that in that we have uneven flows. We are hiring more agents than analysts. And so we're struggling to try and find a mechanism where we can bring agents and analysts in a manner that we can hold training at the same time. So I don't know if we're going to be able to sustain hiring agents and analysts and training them at the same time. I'll just explain a little bit when I train. It would be agent, I'm healthy but not super athletic. Is possible still be an agent? Yes, it is. However, I would recommend that if you want to become an agent, the physical aspect is a huge part. I would start a stretching program. I would start a push-up program, an exercise program. Not just so that you can become super fit, but also a workout program is huge in maintaining your stress as you go through the training, which can be intense. And when you graduate, the cases that you'll work can be intense. So a good workout program, I would say, should be mandatory for anyone who becomes an agent. And I would even recommend it for anyone who wants to be an analyst. There's so much to be gained by having a healthy exercise program if you can. So should you apply for an FBI analyst position straight out of college? You can apply straight out of college. You could get other jobs. You could try other agencies. But again, please make sure, do your homework. Research whether FBI, whether US Marshals, whether Secret Service, DEA, CIA, diplomatic state security. Find the right agency that will fit for what you want to do. Do you want to travel the world? Do you want to sit behind a desk? Do you want to work against certain kinds of bad guys? Find the agency that might be specializing in that. All right. What is the work-life balance for intelligence analysts at the FBI? I would say it's a challenge. It doesn't mean it can't be done, but if you're passionate about what you do, it can be a challenge because there are more than enough criminals. There's more than enough terrorists. There's so much to be done. Matter of fact, anytime that a neighbor thinks another neighbor might be building sodium nitrate bombs or ammonium nitrate bombs in their house, people call the police and a report gets sent to the FBI. Well, there are so many reports being sent to the FBI about the crazy, the wacko, the real and imagined threats, that we have agents and analysts who could spend nothing but every day trying to track down and check whether these are actual threats or not. So we're being inundated with this kind of thing. So if you don't have
Sorry, Frank, you froze up. You froze up for a second, Frank. Sorry about that.
Okay, am I unfrozen now?
You're good now.
Okay. I just got a sign that said your internet connection is unstable.
Just as you're talking about the FBI and all the duties, and we have a question about government officials coming up real soon. So.
Did you conduct interviews in the role? Yes, FBI intelligence analysts are starting to do more and more interviews. There's so much to be done. Agents didn't always like analysts doing interviews, but there's more and more opportunities for analysts to do interviews. Did I hear correctly that you've worked as a consultant for the police department, et cetera? If so, can you explain the position? What education experience were you integral for this position? What has happened is, because of my communication analysis background, my handwriting analysis experience, body language and and teaching law enforcement officers from around the world, occasionally I've gotten police departments who have asked me to come to their departments and either instruct their officers in some of the things that I do, or to help out on a case. And so I've gotten cases sent to me from around the world, whether it's handwriting from a bathroom stall from a school saying I'm going to blow up this school, to a threat letter, to blackmail letters, to all kinds of cases where they've asked me on my opinion as to who do I think did it? Can I help identify the person who did it? What interview strategy would I use on this type of person? What technique would I use to help encourage a runaway teen to come back to her family? I'll give you an example on that one. One of the cases I worked, a teenage girl had run away from home. Parents kind of knew where she was, but the teenager wanted nothing to do with them. So the very straightforward strategy that I worked with was, even though the parents and the children had a tumultuous relationship, I said, what I want you to do now is start agreeing with your daughter no matter what she says. And I want you to find the most valuable thing she left in her room, and I want you to mail that to where she is. And sure enough, they found a stuffed animal that was one of the most valuable things, and they mailed it to her. And what started out being very argumentative and contentious, to both parent and child crying on the phone, and the child reuniting with the parents, because the child finally felt heard by the parents. So, and in consulting with law enforcement has been anything from free, as part of my duties, to depending on what they asked for, to being paid. And it can be quite lucrative if you get good at it. Usually when I was instructing law enforcement, my usual fee was $2,500 to $3,500 for a day. To one of the last classes I taught, I believe I got paid over $15,000 to speak at one conference for 1 hour. So it can be pretty lucrative to do some of these things if you know what you're doing and you do it well. So given the current political climate, how often do you find yourself analyzing communication behavior of government officials? Oh.
I told you that one was coming.
Yes. If I could do one thing, and this is why I really want to work with Howard on, is I would want to create a critical thinking class. And the reason why, I mean, I've got a critical thinking class, but I want to create a critical thinking class with Howard that's taught at the college level. Because one of the things that I am seeing across the board as to why we're in the position that we are in is because of the complete absence of critical thinking. Or as I like to say, I am sick and tired of seeing people who are cognitively unemployed. When you see how people are so challenged when it comes to critical thinking, it has created the climate that we are in. Holy moly, who's that? So give you an example. Can you still hear me okay?
Yep, you're loud and clear.
Okay. If I was to have a charity and I defrauded my charity, and if I was to start up a Frank Marsh company and I defrauded the company, and if I was to start up a school and I defrauded the school, would you elect me the head of the PTA? And when we can see that the complete absence of critical thinking when it comes to people making decisions. So I'll give you an example of a case that I wish I had worked. We had a special agent who was accused of killing his wife, and he says it was in self-defense. So go with me on this. I want you to understand the logic. Here's a special agent who works out every day. Here's a special agent who was in law enforcement and had handled some incredibly violent criminals. Here's a special agent who had been in the military and had been a part of SWAT and who had trained with weapons and trained in how to disarm the most violent of criminals. Here's an agent who treated his body like a temple, so he didn't eat any junk food. He was in incredible shape. He was an instructor, and he trained other agents how to fight and disarm and conduct investigations. And yet this agent said his wife, who had never been in law enforcement, never been in the military, never worked out a day in her life, was an alcoholic who was overweight, was easily intimidated by this agent. And the agent claimed that his wife or ex-wife, who was never worked out, never worked with weapons, threatened him with a knife, and he was in fear for his life, so he put 4 bullets into her. So go with me on the logic here, critical thinking skills. Does that sound like a rational argument to you? Like something that you as a good defense attorney or a good prosecutor wouldn't be able to unravel that argument? And yet that agent got off because the judge looked at the knife and said, oh yeah, that's a pretty intimidating knife. I am frustrated at the lack of critical thinking in our courts. I'm frustrated at the lack of critical thinking in our country. And giving you one of my favorite examples, going with the O.J. Simpson case. The prosecutors in the O.J. Simpson case provided evidence that linked O.J. Simpson's blood to the crime scene. And they said, and I quote, that only 1 in 400 people would have this blood type. Well, the defense rightly argued that you could fill a football stadium with the amount of people who have that blood type. And so the prosecution dropped that evidence. Well, let's take the defense up on that challenge and let's ask some questions. Let's fill a football stadium up in Los Angeles with the amount of people who have that blood type and ask these questions. How many people in this football stadium that match this blood type knew O.J. Simpson's wife, Nicole Simpson? Over 90% of your people would be gone. Out of all the people who in this football stadium that matched this blood type and knew O.J.'s wife, how many of them knew where she lived? More people leave the stadium. Out of all the people in the stadium that matched this blood, that knew Nicole, that knew where she lived, wanted her dead. How many people are left in your stadium? How many people in that stadium that matched that blood type, that knew where she lived, that knew where she lived, wanted her dead, had been violent to her before? Can you see that by systematically asking questions as to whether it's who to vote for, or whether or not to believe a 911 call, or whether to believe an agent's or a suspect's statement, we can critically decompose, break that argument apart, and challenge the logic of those statements or those cases? So I digress.
We have 9 questions, and so we'll be happy to stay with you to midnight, but maybe if we could just kind of, in brief, just answer these remaining 9 questions.
Okay.
To make sure we get through them.
What do you suggest for someone interested in intelligence law enforcement who casually used marijuana in the past? Mention it up front. It's hard to hire someone who hasn't used marijuana. So, and what's your definition of casual? Because that's going to come at you. Socrates says wisdom begins with the definition terms. And so we had someone say, well, casual was, 100 times, whereupon the interviewer was like, well, that's not casual. So don't allow it to dissuade you. go ahead and apply, put it out there and say, oh, absolutely, I've done it. I'm no longer doing it. So be open and honest about it. Do you have any regrets in choosing this career? No regrets. But my career has been what I've made it. So in other words, I've not been your typical analyst. I have found things that needed to be done, and I studied them and made things happen in my career that what I often call the generalist analyst, the analyst who waits to be told, can often sometimes be frustrated with what they're doing. So if you are passionate about what you do, become smart in it and find the opportunities that aren't always offered. Sometimes opportunities have got to be seized. What are the different types of specialties are within the FBI? All kinds of different specialties as to what do you mean as far as FBI agent, analyst. There's FBI police officers, there's dog handlers, there's lab technicians, there's all kinds of jobs that you can do. Can you repeat the name of the man you said to study his books and methods? Name of the man. Well, I would highly recommend a couple of things. If you're interested in studying deception detection, the one I forgot to mention is Avion Sapir. He's the former Israeli intelligence officer who taught me how to study deception. So it's Avinom Sapir. His website is lsiscan.com. He is so smart. He is so scary. I'm afraid to talk to him. But he is one of the most brilliant men when it comes to detecting deception from someone's statements. The books that I mentioned were Investigative Discourse Analysis by Don Ribon and Identifying Lies in Disguise by Wendell Rudisell. Okay, can you repeat the name? I'm very interested in conflict negotiation. Does this communication styles do? Yes, conflict negotiation, you want to study these books, but if you want to know conflict negotiation, I also highly recommend that you read Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. And I believe, matter of fact, Howard, you still have the book list, do you not?
I do. And so if anybody wants that, just send me an email, hb as in boy s103@psu.edu. That's hbs103@psu.edu, and I can send that book list to you.
Oh, and also if you're interested in conflict negotiation, I highly recommend that you read Just Listen by Mark Goulston and Talking to Crazy by Mark Goulston. Those are the two of the best books in communication and in negotiating that I would highly recommend. Those are also on the book list I've given Howard. What is the average caseload for an agent? It can be anything from a few cases to many cases, depending on the complexity of the case. What was the most challenging case that you worked on? Oosh. I wouldn't call it one of the most challenging. One of the most difficult cases I worked on, I will say, is I was about to testify on a young man who had brutally beaten someone. And just before I was about to testify against him, the judge called for a quick break. I saw the suspect leave the courtroom, walk down a hallway, and I saw his elderly mother and his brother who had special needs. And I overheard his mother say to him, "If they put you in jail, who's going to take care of us? You're the only one providing for us." I was about to testify and put this man away for many years, young man away for many years. And I just heard that he's the one who's providing for his elderly sick mother and for his brother with special needs. You want to talk about a gut-wrenching, because what do you do in that case? You got to tell the truth. But yes, there's many difficult cases and far too many for me to talk about at the time we've got left. Are there remote volunteer opportunities? There are internships available. And I know with some of the, depending on your capabilities and your skills and talents that you bring, that there are times that the FBI has reached out to people with different expertise. As someone who is not 100% sure exactly what they want out of a career in criminal justice, what do you suggest is the best way to narrow down the career paths? Talk to people, find someone, and it's not hard to do. Whether you go on LinkedIn or some others, you can find people who have clearly listed the fields. and talk to them and find out what they liked and what they didn't like, what was the best, what was the worst. But yeah, definitely talk to all kinds of people. How tough is the application progress? The application progress is difficult because we're not the best at handling it administratively. You might get sent the same form to you 4 different times, or you might be told that we lost your forms and we need you to resubmit. So it can be difficult that way. My father served in the Persian Gulf War. Also, I just wanted to thank you for your service and for your time today. Thank you kindly. I greatly appreciate it. And now it's time to follow up the drug question. The FBI website says that marijuana use has to be seized for 3 years and all other legal substances must be seized for 10 years before you apply. Now, do recruiters and interviewers stick to those numbers? You tried something in college, do you actually have to wait 10 years to apply even if you're upfront? I don't know as to exactly the hiring process as to what the specific rules and regulations, but I will tell you this, different agencies have different requirements. So if the FBI is a stickler on it, DEA or Secret Service or some of the other agencies that are out there, and there's a lot, would gladly take you in. Reason being is I'm a firm believer you're the sum qualities of your good and bad. And I think, as I told you, we have hired some people with squeaky clean backgrounds who couldn't catch a single criminal because they didn't know what it was like to do drugs. They didn't know what it was like to rob or to harm or to do any of these things. So you are the sum of your good and bad qualities. Do not allow anything that you've done in your past prevent you from achieving your goal. You may not be able to achieve that goal with that specific agency, but you know what? You may be able to find your goal through another agency or another corporation, or maybe even becoming a world-renowned expert by doing the research yourself. So I'm hoping that I've shared some information with you that I thought that you might want to hear. It's been my pleasure. And if you have any questions, please get them to Howard. And Howard, I'd be happy to try and dig up some answers for them.
Thank you, Frank. And as always, I wish we had another 10 hours to talk to you. There's so much that that you can offer us. And I appreciate you giving us, you went over time. So if we pay you the prorated rate at $10,000 an hour, I think we're, I don't think we're going to pay you that. So sorry. I wish we could.
Do you have anybody left, or did they all leave? Can you tell?
They're all saying thank you. And so I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. I really appreciate you spending time and asking such great questions. Frank, as I said, thank you very much, as always, and we'll obviously continue to be in touch. And if anyone wants that book list, or if you have questions, please send an email to me and I'll get that to you. Don't forget that tomorrow night we have a Virginia judge who actually argued the case before the Supreme Court that the Supreme Court declared that executing anyone with mental disabilities, mental retardation, was unconstitutional. So he's going to be talking about his life as a judge and his experience arguing before the Supreme Court, and that's tomorrow night. So, but Frank, thank you very much.
Can I share one last thought?
Thank you.
My parting thought is this. No matter what you want to be willing to work for it. I am constantly amazed when I meet people in every agency, CIA, NSA, DIA, whatever, and I will hand them some research on a given topic and they go, oh my God, this is amazing. Where did you find this? And I say, have you heard of this thing called the internet? I'm amazed at how people are not willing to dig for or search for what they want, whether it's in books, research, or people. Do the homework. Find someone, whether it's with Howard, pick his brain, whether it's with me. Find the person who's doing what you want and talk to them. Get their email. I'm frustrated when I see people who are not willing to do the work, but want to achieve all the benefits without having to work for it. So whatever your goal is, research it on the internet, be willing to do the hard work, and I am telling you, you will have so much opportunity, you will have to turn them down.
Hear, hear. You're preaching to the choir. Please do that, folks. Frank once told me, imagine, his advice to a student was, imagine your dream career. One thing will be true, someone will have it. And will it be you or it will be someone else? You just have to figure out how to get to that spot. And so don't be afraid to hear no from someone if you ask them a question. Be persistent. and don't be afraid to fail occasionally, because Frank and I have talked about this a lot. Failure and learning from that failure is the key to success.
Absolutely.
And we both have failed a lot in our lives, but I think we've had some great success also. We've met some really interesting people because we were willing to ask if they would talk to us. And it was as simple as that. So
Good deal.
thank you, Frank.
Thanks, Howard. Good talking to you.